Union. Upon arrival, healthcare is crucial. Children will need psychosocial care. Many will have missed out on proper nutrition. Standard pediatric vaccinations will be prioritized, and the Commission is supporting the supply of vaccines through HERA. Inside Ukraine, genuine humanitarian corridors must be established to evacuate the most vulnerable. We are providing substantial humanitarian aid, work with our international partners, and in coordination with Ukrainian authorities to ensure humanitarian aid reaches its destination and that children can receive protection. This war will mark the children of Ukraine for life. We will not leave a stone unturned to ensure that they will be well cared for, that they can recover and be a child again. This is not only a job, it is our collective responsibility and a human imperative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice President Šuica, and I now give the floor to Commissioner Ylva Johansson.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning. Putin's army has so far killed a reported 158 children in Ukraine and wounded many more. Last month, Russian soldiers shot Matvey, 8 years old, and his little brother, 4-year-old Klim, and their mother, Margarita, as they tried to escape the hell of Bucha. These war crimes must not go unpunished. Eurojust and Europol will have a key role to play here. About 2 million children escaped Ukraine with their lives. Many children now face a new danger. A danger I warned of here in plenary last time we met here in Strasbourg, nearly 1 month ago, the danger of trafficking. Your resolution shows that you share my concerns. Lithuanian authorities are investigating possible trafficking of 43 children for adoption. There are no confirmed cases yet, but we know from bitter experience that the danger is real. Children are at the top of our agenda, key among the 10 priorities I presented at the Extraordinary Council last week. Priorities for welcoming people fleeing the war. Our aim to protect children from war zone to safe home. Last month, Member States pledged to welcome more than 15,500 Ukrainian refugees from Moldova. 512 have now arrived in the EU, many of them children. My services are working on standard operating procedures for transferring unaccompanied minors between Member States, making clear when registering, relocating, referring children, we must never forget they are children and keep their best interest in mind. The EU Agency for Asylum will play a central role. We are working with the agency on common guidance and standards. And I cannot praise UNICEF enough for their great job they are doing protecting children in the EU and in Ukraine. And since day one, I've been working to prevent trafficking, starting at the EU border, where 282 Frontex staff are helping to identify people at risk from trafficking. Europol is gathering intelligence, coordinating police cooperation, monitoring online activities by potential traffickers and by people trying to exploit the services of victims. Europol has set up a specific task force against trafficking in human beings to work with law enforcement in Ukraine and in EU countries along the border. Many member states are warning against the dangers of trafficking with websites and hotlines, handing out leaflets at train stations, increasing police presence. Our Agency for Law Enforcement Training, CEPOL, is teaching border guards, police and others to identify potential victims and traffickers. We issued calls to use our EU funds to prevent and fight trafficking and support victims. Last July, I appointed Diane Smith as EU anti-trafficking coordinator. Right away, in the first week of war, she activated a network of national rapporteurs against trafficking of human beings, and they have already met twice. She visited Romania, Poland, together with your intergroup on children's rights, and she's doing a very important job in these days. Our priority now is registration, registration, registration. We need to know where these children are, all 2 million. Not one child can go missing. The member states need to step up on registration. EU-LISA is starting technical work to put in place a platform so the member states can exchange information, a platform for registration. We also need to register providers of housing and transport so refugees know who is safe, who they can trust. As my colleague Dubravka, Vice President Suica just said, we have set up the Solidarity Platform to coordinate efforts. It had met twice a week since the war started. Soon, the Solidarity Platform will meet in a session dedicated to protecting children, to discuss issues member states can only address together. How to trace children, boosting registration in member states of arrival and destination, reception capacities for children, also children with disabilities, cooperation with Ukrainian authorities, and to endorse an action plan against trafficking of human beings, we must also work on family reunification. Honourable members, our great challenge still lies ahead of us. The longer this war goes on, the greater the risk to children. And just imagine that you are a Ukrainian mother or father, looking at your 3 children, having to take a very, very difficult decision. Should we keep the children here, where we know they are in danger? Or should we send them with our friend and her 2 children, who will leave soon, on a potential also dangerous journey to the European Union, and knowing the risk that this might be the last time we see our children? So many Ukrainian parents have been forced to take this very, very difficult decision. These Ukrainian parents want us to keep their children safe. They count on us. So let's show them that they can count on us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Johansson. And now we go to the representatives of the different political groups, starting with the EPP group, Eva Kopacz.
Pani Przewodnicząca.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, the Commission, for taking up the issue. Regrettably, the Council is not present. 1 year ago, we discussed the first strategy for the rights of children, and now we lack words to talk about the harrowing images from Ukraine. Bucha is the latest place where new horrors took place. One cannot find words to describe that. Every second child in Ukraine has left their homes. They don't sleep in their beds. They don't go to school. Very often they have been separated from their families and friends. Today we will be emphasizing that we need to ensure children's rights to education and other rights. And We should ensure to these children all that the Russian aggression deprived them of. We must protect those children that are not being protected. Children, unaccompanied minors, orphans, but we must not be naive. There will be also people that will want to use the victims of this war, and therefore we need an effective system of registration of children, because how can we support and protect children that we don't know of? And we must not commit errors. We must do more, because the Ukrainians are now entrust us with their children and young people. This is our great responsibility, also to make sure that these children can return to their families, and that they learn about the values of Europe, values that should always be protected.
Kopacz. Next, for the S&D Group, Irache Garcia Perez.
Gracias.
Ďakujem, vážená pani predsednička, dámy.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, President. We are hearing every day worse and worse news from Ukraine, and we're not talking about what's happening at the front either. What is really terrible is that the horrific atrocity.
A tento scenár,
this macabre scene on the streets, it seems day by day there's a fight between humanity and evil. We can still see before our very eyes the bombing of a hospital in Mariupol where pregnant women and babies were killed. These are crimes that we shall not give up on until we have found those who are guilty. But we have to try and mitigate the worst things, the crazy events stemming from Mr. Putin's actions. Children shouldn't have to experience war, and we have to try and bring this to a close as soon as possible. But 7.5 million children who lived in Ukraine have now had to leave their homes, and their lives have changed from one day to the next. Some have to go into hiding, some have to leave their cities, some have to go to other countries. Maybe they have to even leave their families, their parents, their grandparents. The EU can and must help these people, regardless of the situation they find themselves.
ček opatrení.
Need measures to
Prosím.
that people's childhood is being protected together with the government of Ukraine. We need drinking water, accommodation, we need hygiene products, many more aspects as well. But let's not forget that these are children and need places to play, to continue going to school, psychosocial support, and also moving on to the humanitarian corridors. We cannot allow that there are those people who are fleeing are being killed in cold blood. The EU has to work with international organisations to make sure that people can be evacuated in a safe way and that these people are protected. These people are particularly vulnerable, of course, and susceptible to mafia groups which are active there. And they're also volunteers, of course, who are going to stations to pick people up to help. But there are some people who just pretend that they're there to help, and then later they exploit children and women. So the authorities have to be involved as well. So these huge streams of people need to be taken care of, but we need to try and harness the goodwill that exists, but at the same time have to make sure that no woman and no child ends up in the hands of those who would do them ill. Given what we're trying to do in the EU and this platform for solidarity, there's some good things being done. The exchanges between the EU and the agencies, the EU and others, are being facilitated, and of course we have to work on looking at the UN Convention for Children, which has been ratified by the Russian Federation at the time. So children have to be protected, and we have to make sure that we consider the well-being of all children, and not to forget the aspects of human rights that pertain to this. You might think it seems unattainable, but we have to try and build a world with peace, solidarity, and we need to show that this is possible, and we hope that the politicians in Russia will understand that soon too.
On behalf of the Renew Group, I invite Hilde Woutmans to take the floor.
Dank u wel, mevrouw de voorzitter.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. Since the 24th of February, there's just one thing that we're looking at, and that is the horror of the war in Ukraine. We see it as we get up in the morning and as we go to bed at night. And we've seen the terrible pictures from the maternity hospital in Mariupol, and then now we're seeing these terrible images of the bloodbath in Barucha. Millions of people are fleeing, and I want to take my responsibility also as the chair of the Intergroup for Children, and I'd like to thank you, President, because, Commissioner, because you had the courage to go to the spot to show that Europe cares. Thank you very much for being there on behalf of all of us, President. And I'm also very happy that this session is mainly about Ukraine. Yesterday we were looking at the need to make CITES stricter. Now we're talking about protecting children. You know that there are 10,000 unaccompanied minors who've gone missing in Europe. And now we're hearing from Child Focus that since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, 2,000 minors are missing. Where are they?
Dat is onze plicht.
It is our duty to look for those children. We know that they're fleeing. We know that they're in another European country, in Poland. I hope that they are safe, but I fear that some of them are dead. It is the proof of a society how it deals with weak people. So let's show who we are. We're late. We need to register. We need to make sure that they get child-friendly information. We have to make sure that they're looked after. We have to make sure that their parents are found. That is our duty. We have European instruments. Let us beef them up.
The passion for this debate that we have. If we were living in Ukraine, if it were our children who were on the run, don't you want people to protect them? Yes, I have 2 children. Let's protect the children. And I want to conclude with a citat of a great woman, Madeleine Albright. The bottom line is that a person who flees his or her home does not shed the right to be treated with dignity and respect. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Woutmans. And now on behalf of the Greens Group, Saskia Brikmont.
Madame la Commissaire.
Hvala lepa. Madam Commissioner, maybe it's not children that are being targeted, but it's children who are being killed. And this underscores the cruelty of war, violence, exile. For the youngest, any life that's held in suspension is a life that's being stolen and being thrown into danger, being thrown into fear. This is something that children should not have to experience, and children are the victims, the first victims of atrocities that adults are committing, and at least 158 have paid with their lives. This must stop. Almost 2 million children are already fleeing war. 60% of the population in Ukraine is internally displaced, and some people who have remained live in constant fear of the ongoing conflict. The European Union is taking its responsibility. It's acted rapidly to implement the Directive on Temporary Protection. There has to be quick and speedy support for those fleeing Ukraine without any distinction. We have to make sure the most vulnerable are protected so that we don't add to the horrors of war, discrimination, and affecting their dignity in that way. We have to make sure that their official transports after they've crossed borders to make sure we avoid exploitation and abuse and trafficking of children. We need to provide the support they need, the needs they need. We have to find a tutor that's appointed immediately for these unaccompanied children and try and achieve family reunification. We have to allow these children and teenagers to have prospects of a future of a dignified fashion. We have to reopen the possibility to have access to a child guarantee and to education. If they have access to education, culture, psychosocial support, and sexual and reproductive health and rights, that is extremely important. There are associations, civil society organisations, local authorities as well, who have acted in exemplary fashion. You are the face of Europe welcoming people, and let us make us proud of the solidarity we've shown that your actions and voices have called for so many years. It is now time to put human and financial resources at the direct disposal of the organisations, local authorities and citizens who are showing solidarity, who shouldn't have to shoulder this entire burden themselves. Yes, there are things being put in place to help people fleeing Ukraine, but this shows that European solidarity works. What we're implementing today has to provide a pillar, a common pillar, that common asylum and migration policy in Europe is built on welcoming, on solidarity, on being humane. And this appeal is one of the vast majority of this chamber, following close cooperation between the different political groups. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you to the Ukrainian youth and the youth of Europe as well.
Danke, Frau Kollegin.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Ms. Simona Baldassare.
Grazie Presidente. Colleghi, ogni minuto in Ucraina un...
Thank you very much. Colleagues, every minute a child becomes a refugee in Ukraine. That's what UNICEF said a few days ago. Many children have completely lost the basis of their life. They've grown up very fast. Either they become refugees or they're shut up in various cellars or shelters. About 2 million children have left Ukraine in the hope of finding a better future. We in the European Union need to take action. Many of these children risk being exposed to trafficking in human beings. When they enter the European Union, we must immediately register and identify these children. And if we've got children that are accompanied, we must see who they're traveling with. We have to see what their needs are, and if they need health services or if they need psychological help, they should get it. There are also orphans who are in the middle of this war. There are babies who've been born in bunkers and shelters during the war. It's a tragedy. We've got to help these children. We've got to set up humanitarian corridors so that they can reach the EU safely. Those are some of the main points in our report. It would be positive to include all political groups in this work. These are children who should not be exposed to ideological wars. Let's stand shoulder to shoulder and ensure that these children have a future. If we're to get peace on earth, if we want to combat war, we've got to start with the children. Thank you.
Zu Wort gemeldet hat sich Frau.
The next speaker is Ms. Jadwiga Wiśniewska.
Panie komisarz, szanowni państwo.
Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, mothers are being raped and children abused, mothers fleeing from Ukraine to the closest safe haven. This safe haven turned out to be Poland. In the last weeks, over 2.5 million Ukrainians fled to Poland. It is Polish people that received Ukrainians. Some 160,000 children are now have access to Polish educational system. We have provided all rights, healthcare, and otherwise. We appeal to create a fund to finance all the costs. We have received over 2.5 million refugees. What funds have we received? You are so emotional and saying that it's so horrible. We must begin to act. And we should stop with appearances. We need decisive sanctions. We're talking about genocide and the violation of basic human rights. And what is the Union doing? Sanctioning Poland, who received 2.5 million refugees. The funds that we should receive are being blocked. But of course, remember the annexation of the Crimea and the embargo on exports of arms to Russia. How many European member states violated those sanctions, this embargo? 10. And the current sanctions are equally ineffective. So the women first violated are later run over by tanks. And it is not only a war against Ukraine, it is a war against the West, a war against the world as a whole. If we are talking about human rights, they are being violated because the sanctions are not real.
Cornelia Ernst zum
Ms. Cornelia Ernst is the next speaker.
Ja, meine Damen und Herren.
Ladies and gentlemen, maybe this could be a good day if we have a resolution on the table that doesn't just talk about promising humanitarian aid in its headline, but in its context as well, because in war, young people and children often without any protection, all of them. And that's why it's right that we talk about Roma children, stateless children, young students, but also especially vulnerable people like LGBTI people should be included and protected from violence, because Bucha has shown us clearly that people who go around killing others don't ask for their ID cards first. So support our amendments so children and young people who are in prison and detention centres in Ukraine, most of these being third country nationals, should not be forgotten. Children are children regardless of where they come from. And that's why I call on you to stop speaking with a forked tongue here. Because protecting people in Ukraine should be a priority. Protecting children, that is absolutely clear, and I stand behind that. But to condemn people to rotting in prison because they come from another country is not acceptable. We don't want ideologies and racism now. We want selfless help to show what a society really can achieve. And in these sort of times, equality and freedom are values that nobody should ignore. And hence the support of all fleeing children is necessary. All of those who are on the external borders of the EU especially. Thank you.
Danke.
Thank you. I'll ask now Ms. Daniela Rondinelli to come to the lectern.
Grazie Presidente, gentile Commissario. Thank you very much, President, Commissioner, dear colleagues. Since the beginning of the war, 4 million refugees from Ukraine have streamed into the EU, and that includes 1 million minors who we're talking about today. We're talking about their entry into Europe and all the actions that we're establishing in order to welcome them and in order to safeguard their rights. As we've said, their rights are fundamental. I would like to put the focus on a problem which is dear to my heart. It's the fact that all of these young people, all of these students are breaking off their studies. They're no longer able to train. If we want to truly protect these young people who are fleeing from war, then we need to go above and beyond simply welcoming them and hosting them. We need to work on integration. We need to have humanitarian teaching corridors and other mechanisms of solidarity so that young people, teachers and students from Ukraine can enter our schools. We must do everything in our power to ensure that dialogue happens and to do more, working together hand in hand with Ukrainian students in Ukrainian universities. There needs to be a right to continued schooling and university for Ukrainians and for others who want to arrive in Europe. We could have an extraordinary program, Erasmus for Ukraine. Erasmus Ukraine would allow students to sign up for free this year, and it would establish a waiver for learning for those teachers who are currently in the war. Diplomas would be recognized as, and this would be extremely important for young Ukrainian people so that they can reconstruct and help the renaissance of their country. What's always been so good about our policies is that we have been able to bring people together and to build wealth and prosperity together. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Ms. Sabine Verheyen now can take the floor.
Sehr geehrter Herr Präsident.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioners. The European Union is based on the belief that war on the continent of Europe has been consigned to history. Unfortunately, Mr. Putin has destroyed this. The attack of Putin on Ukraine involves attacks on civilians, women and children. These attacks are happening on schools, theatres and hospitals, and this is an attack on our very values in Europe and is a crime against humanity. The Russian invasion in Ukraine is not just threatening the population, but threatening the future of a whole generation. Many people fleeing are children and in need of a special protection. We have to make sure these people get protection and access to education so they have a future, regardless of where they have to flee to. Otherwise, in the longer term, we risk a lost generation. Children need special protection from any form of violence or abuse, and we have to take care of children. Schools are extremely important for the physical and mental and psychological health of those children who've had to leave their home country. Psychosocial support and a safe environment is what children who've been traumatized need, and it is our obligation to do our utmost to make sure that we provide help for these children and enable a future to be one of their prospects that they can see. So we need to make sure they have access to education at all levels, psychosocial support for traumatized children, support for unaccompanied children and young people, including stateless people. And that means the EU needs to make sure that the member states support us in getting access to Erasmus and other programs. This shouldn't just be something that we think of as part-time. It's an obligation as human beings.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Now, Ms. Gabriela Bischoff has the floor.
Danke, Herr Präsident.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, this war is having an effect on an entire generation of children in Ukraine, but also on a whole generation of children and young people in Europe who see how we are dealing with this war and with refugee children and young people. And therefore it's important. The 7.5 million children and young people in Ukraine need help. They need psychosocial support. And that's why it's important that we're having this discussion. And I think it's absolutely horrific that the Council is not here. Obviously, the debate is not of sufficient interest to them. As S&D, we have already called on the Council to adopt a child protection package, and it's important that we do that again. Who protects these children if we don't do it? As Ms. Johansson said, we must first and foremost treat these child refugees as children. It sounds easy, but it isn't, and that's why we need special measures, and that's why education is so important. We have to make sure that we have inclusive access, that we give digital support to these children. We have to make sure that there's childcare available so that the women can enter the labor market. Exploitation of these children and women is a huge risk. We see that the international networks of traffickers of human beings are on the spot. We can be proud in Europe that we have the child guarantee, but we must give it a fresh coat of paint. We have to adapt it to this situation, and that means financing. Because one thing is clear, I've said that from the beginning, at the end of the day, we will be measured according to whether or not we could protect these children in the war, and we as in the European Parliament will do our utmost to make sure that they find safety.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Petros Austrevicius.
Mr. Chair, dear Commissioners, colleagues, the war of aggression launched by the Putin regime against Ukraine is primarily directed towards Ukrainian civilians, especially women and children. The brutal and criminal acts of Putin's war amount to ethnic cleansing and genocide. Putin is seeking to expel Ukrainians from their homeland, to seize their land and property. Atrocious war crimes committed by Russian soldiers increasingly threaten the security and livelihoods of Ukrainian people. The Russian aggressors seek to impede the evacuation of civilians, oftentimes by taking advantage of humanitarian corridors in order to force the resettlements of Ukrainians to Russia. The UN Refugee Agency must facilitate the safe return of all Ukrainian refugees. I sincerely do not understand this strongly question the agreements made by the head of the Red Cross, Peter Maurer, during his visit to Moscow to open refugee camps in Russia. Can we allow this de facto human trafficking? Ukrainian refugees, especially children and young adults, should not become a lost generation, deprived of a happy childhood and the chance of an education. We must do everything we can to ensure the future of peaceful Ukrainian caught up in the Putin's war. It is also important that Ukrainian children receive an education without losing their cultural identity and language. Ukrainians are in need of safe refuge. We must now behave as Europeans and welcome all of them into our family, into our union. Thank you.
Danke, Frau Ali.
Thank you. The next speaker is Alice Kuhnke for 2.5 minutes.
Herr talman.
President, Commissioners, ladies and gentlemen. I've just got back from Ukraine and Poland. Together with Polish volunteers, I visited an area northwest of Lviv, in Yavoriv, a small town. Ukraine's future is fleeing. In the villages around, the population have doubled, tripled, even in terms of the number of people. Many children who have been fleeing are fleeing within their own country. Putin's bombs have forced millions of children to flee and to leave their homes behind them. Those who should be sitting safely in their school benches or playing in their kindergartens instead are left in uncertainty. Teenage rooms have been exchanged for camp beds in transit camps. Playgrounds have been exchanged for metro stations to work as bunkers. These people fleeing have their first experience of the EU of the people they meet at the border. And there's a lot of people received with warmth, with blankets, a bit of chocolate, but the Polish authorities nor EU resources were often not to be found. And whoever could have not had any difficulty in finding these people who were tired and exploited them. At another border station, there were children who had frozen to death, who had died of lack of water in their parents', in mostly mothers' arms. There are trafficking leagues that are there to pick up women before they've even left Ukraine and pick them up once they cross the border. I saw testimonies where women were obliged to pay their access with sex. Nobody should be exposed to that. No child should have to experience that. The EU has to eradicate men buying sex, men buying women and children. How ridiculous is that? How sick is that? Who is kidnapping children? Who has sex with children? Who buys women who are fleeing, who've lost everything? It's those men who have a special place in hell. The EU has resources, they have responsibility. After these days, however, in Poland and Ukraine, I'm worried that our big words about how horrible this is will not be followed by actions, by deeds. It is a nightmare what we saw, but that we didn't do everything we could would be awful. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Jean-Paul Garot has the floor.
The conflict in Ukraine is upending the whole world. The scenes of devastation are increasing in number. There are more and more victims. The people are affected very hard, particularly women and children who are fleeing. They leave their houses behind. They separate themselves from their husbands who have been left to defend the country. It is unacceptable that such a tragedy is unfolding on the European continent. Given these scenes, there has been solidarity, great humanity. People have spurred themselves into action. We must further encourage all initiatives at all levels which provide support to these unfortunate people. The remarkable countries on the list includes Poland. 2.5 million refugees have been taken in. Romania, Hungary, and there are others too. It's the best of a Europe of nations. We must support all of those countries, but they're not being supported. It's quite the opposite. It's stunning to see that while there is solidarity, no European aid has reached these countries I've mentioned. But what's even worse is that the European Court of Justice and the European Commission have taken sanctions against Hungary and Poland. They are criticised of breaking the rule of law, but I think that is a questionable allegation. These are different issues, but it's shocking. We see that there is solidarity, but the Commission doesn't support Poland and Hungary. The Commission has stopped 39.4 million euros from reaching Poland and 7 million euros from reaching Hungary. These countries are exemplary in their solidarity, showing solidarity to millions of refugees, but they are being punished by our institutions. These countries must not be sanctioned. No, they must be helped and congratulated. The
Commission found the funds to deal with the health crisis, to sanction Russia and to find money for weapons for Ukraine. The Commission should also provide support for Poland and Hungary. It should start by lifting sanctions and allowing them to have access to European funds. Maybe the Commission doesn't like the political systems in those countries, but I am very scandalized by the fact that the left and the liberals in this country are putting pressure on the Commission so that the Commission wouldn't make 39.4 billion euros available to Poland. The Socialists and the Democrats, the Greens, the left and the S&D on the 24th of March spoke to the Commission about that, and I think that is wrong. The European Commission must unblock the recovery funds and provide additional support so that these millions of refugees, these vulnerable people, can be protected. They are vulnerable to many threats. Thank you.
See, our next speaker.
Thank you.
Robert Zīle.
Honourable Chair, Commissioners, the best way to protect children and youth from Ukraine would be to adopt very strong sanctions this week relating to energy so that we do not keep feeding the war machinery of Russia. Of course, we will hope for such sanctions, but there are very many young people who already are here in the European Union, in some states more and some less, and many of them are under the risk of criminal activities, of criminal bans. So we need integration. That, of course, is a very delicate thing about integrating the youth and children in the countries where they end up. That is because it is very important also to keep up the Ukrainian space of culture and education for these youngsters. And it is very important. There are countries like Latvia, for example, where there is still